Welcome to this week's Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Sharlot Hall Museum in Prescott, Arizona. My guest this week is Barbara Cannon. Barbara is a local resident here in Prescott, Arizona, and she is a recent author of a book called Prescott Arizona, The Early Years, Then and Now Photo Tour. And Barbara Cannon, the author, produced this book in cooperation with Sharlot Hall Museum and our research and library and archives. And Barbara, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Happy New Year, Barbara. And I was really excited that you had the time to come in and sit down and talk about your book. I've got it right in front of me. It is beautifully produced. It's got some great photographs. And I thought we'd just start a little bit about your background. Barbara, did you grow up here in Prescott or your family? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I did not grow up here, but my grandmother did. My great-grandparents moved here in 1916 with a bunch of kids and 2 wagons and chickens and cats and came to settle. They moved up here from Mesa, and some of our family has been here ever since. I moved here with my husband and our kids about almost 10 years ago.
All right. And were you living in Mesa at the time you moved up here?
No, we were living in Salt Lake City.
All right. And so where in the Prescott area did your great-grandparents settle?
They moved around quite a bit. In fact, that's partly what got me to start this book, because I came to the archive library trying to find out where my grandmother lived, because she passed away before we moved here, so I couldn't ask her about where they lived. So I did find out a couple of places that their family lived. One is now the Mile High Middle School. So I've told my kids when they were going to school there that they might be sitting in a classroom right above where their great-grandmother's living room was.
How about that? I think that's really interesting. So your grandmother, great-grandparents, and then your grandparents lived here in Prescott. Was your mother or your father born here in Prescott?
No, my great-grandparents and my grandmother moved back down to the valley in the 1930s, but by that time some of their children had grown and married, so we have had family presence here this entire time.
Very interesting. And so, did your family? Were you raised in the Sun Valley of the Sun down in Mesa?
I wasn't. I was raised actually on the Navajo Reservation in northeastern Arizona. My dad was a high school librarian at Red Mesa High School, and I grew up there until I was 14, and then we moved to Cortez, Colorado, and I lived there through my teenage years.
That's really interesting. Now, tell me, where is that Red Mesa High School? What town is that nearby?
It's a little community called Red Mesa, but it's right up by the Four Corners near another community called Tisnos Pas.
Oh yeah, that's the name of the community you always see on the maps near Four Corners,
yeah,
where people go to stand and sit on 4 states at once.
That's the
one.
What
an interesting place. That had to have been quite a childhood to have grown up in that part of Arizona on the Navajo Reservation.
Yeah, I didn't realize until I was an adult how unique that was. And I didn't realize until I was adult some of the things I took from that were a little different than the normal growing up experience of a lot of Americans.
Right. And so coming back to Prescott with your husband and your children to raise a family here in Prescott, obviously it sounds like it inspired a little genealogy, some family history. And so how long have you been, when did you start thinking that there might be a book in your journey here to discover your family history in Prescott?
Probably, I think it was about 2019 when I came in to look for information about my great-grandparents' family. While I was looking, I started to come across old pictures of Prescott that I thought were really neat, and that led me down a rabbit hole of looking for a lot of old pictures, and then a book idea just kind of came about, especially as I realized that a lot of those old buildings are still here.
Right. And what were your great-grandparents and your grandmother's names?
My great-grandparents were Thomas and Leola Harris, and my grandmother was Mary Harris, but Mary Harris King after she was married.
And were they in the education or in merchants or farming? What was their business?
My great-grandfather kind of was a jack of all trades. He just did whatever he could do as the opportunity came about. But the first job he did have when they moved here was helping to build the new courthouse.
That's really interesting. So he was working on the great Yavapai County Courthouse that sits on the plaza that replaced kind of the older wooden structure.
Yes.
And well, that's really what an interesting tie to your family's history here in the Prescott area. When you were growing up on the Navajo reservation, did your family ever come down to Prescott or to Mesa to vacation or see family members?
Regularly.
Mm-hmm.
We came down to the Phoenix area to visit my grandparents, but they also, in the 1940s, acquired some property in Groom Creek, which is a little south of Prescott, and built a cabin there. So I've been coming to Prescott my entire life to the family cabin and for family reunions.
Well, that's great. So Prescott's in your blood.
Yes.
And I think for anyone who comes to Prescott, whether they were born and raised here or they come to visit or if they have family history here, it is a very special place. And it inspires interest in history because it seems to me around every corner you see another interesting historic building or historic home. And if you're paying attention, it does create a lot of curiosity. And obviously that's something that stuck with you since you were a child.
Yes, and I've also always been interested in old buildings and history in general. So once I started looking at the pictures and learning about them, I just learned more about how fascinating Prescott is.
Well, with that, we're going to take a short break, Barbara, and then we're going to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back, and we're going to talk about some of those first photos that inspired you to create this great new book, Prescott, Arizona, The Early Years. Since 1995, Helken & Horn Ad Agency in Prescott, Arizona has helped local businesses stand out and succeed. From print and radio to websites and social media, their talented team crafts your brand's message and offers a plan to get it out into the community. Want results backed by 30 years of experience? Visit azadagency.com today. Helken & Horn, where their slogan is Be Known. This is Stuart Rosebrook with Arizona Roundup at Sharlot Hall Museum, and my guest this week is Barbara Cannon. Barbara is a Prescott resident, and she is a brand new author of a book called Prescott, Arizona, The Early Years, a then and now photo tour that was done in partnership with Sharlot Hall Museum. It's a beautiful book. Whoops, that happens in radio, and as we're looking through her book, and I am very inspired as I go through the pages to go and look for these different locations across the city. And when we were in our break, I asked her, I said, what were some of the first pictures as you were researching your grandparents and your grandmother's history? Was there anything that sparked your curiosity to create this book?
I don't remember specific pictures, but generally, I think the ones that stuck out the most to me were the pictures of homes, especially with families in front of them. Maybe because I was on the search for where my grandmother grew up. I think those kind of inspired me. And
well, I think that you've struck on something there. In my years of doing Western research and a lot of photographic research on the American West, the one thing that time and time again, when I'm going through photographs, I maybe ooh and ah over the large landscape photographs, or there's a rare photograph of a building or a town I hadn't seen before. But when the photographer has the opportunity, going back to the earliest photographs in the late 1840s, 1850s in the West, working our way up through the decades, and you find a photographer who captures people. You can see their faces, you can see their expressions, maybe there's what they're wearing, the day-to-day hats or clothes, depending on the season, or maybe there's men, women, and children, and sometimes even pets or domestic animals in the photographs. You really pause to look at those photos, and you want to see it you want to see it as large as possible. Do you remember seeing some of those photos as you were going through the collection? Something that was, it ties you to the past in a way that's different than just seeing a beautiful picture of the Grand Canyon.
Yes. Yeah. When I see those pictures, it just helps me remember or made me realize that these are just people just like us. It seems like they might be different because they lived so long ago, but when I look at the faces in the photos, they're just people. They're not that different from us. They probably had most of the same hopes and dreams. So.
Right. And when you were doing the research at the Sharlot Hall's library, were you able to locate through the city guides or through census some of the locations that your family lived here in Prescott?
Just two of them.
What were those?
One was on a lot in the old part of Prescott, South Granite not South Granite, one of the streets. I think it may have been South Marina. And now it's just an empty lot. I'm not sure what happened to the house. But the other one was where the Mile High Middle School now sits.
Very interesting. And so as you found those locations, were you able to read reports, at least in the newspapers or even in as I said, the city guides that gave you some kind of little bit of description of what was there? Or did you say, look at this information, I'm going to go walk out there and see what it looks like today?
I didn't find any specific descriptions, but I did see a picture. It's not in the book, but a picture of the Mile High Middle School area when there were homes there. And most of them were pretty small shacks. My family didn't have a lot of money, so they lived in one of those. So I didn't have a description, but when I was there, I know that their home would have backed up to Granite Creek. So I imagined that my grandmother and her sisters probably played in the creek.
Right. Probably if you were looking for fresh water, if it was simple housing, may not have even had running water in the homes. And so you had to, go get buckets of water to start the day, boil the water, and
Probably.
life was rugged.
Yeah, I think my family, being of a little bit more meager circumstances, was used to that, so it probably wasn't an especially hardship for them. But yeah, they probably did utilize that for water as well as for play for the children.
Right. And so after you discovered those two locations, and you were going through the archives looking in the era. What was the era again? The 1916 to about 1930s? 1930s,
yes.
So the Depression had hit. And a lot of people, I think if we looked at the census, that we won't see much of a population growth in this part of the state during the Depression. And so probably there was probably strong family ties to the Mesa area that you could find support during the Depression.
Most likely.
Yeah. And did your grandparents, great-grandparents, and your grandmother, was it a large family when they moved down to the Mesa?
My grandmother was either number 10 or 11 of a total of 12 or 13 children. They actually moved here because when they were living in Mesa, I think the family was struck with typhus or typhoid fever, something, and one of my grandmother's older brothers his heart had been weakened because of it, and the doctor told them to move to a cooler climate for his heart, if that makes sense. And that's how they ended up here. And so they did have a lot of family down in the Mesa area, and I'm sure they traveled down as often as they could to visit them.
Sure. So once you had located a couple of the areas where your family had lived here in Prescott, you had already gotten your hands deep into the archives, into the photographic collections. What was a spark that led you to say, I think there's a book here?
Well, I don't remember if I thought about the book before. I had printed out a bunch of pictures. I found a bunch of interesting pictures, and I think I printed them out just so that I could look at them better. And it may have been while I was looking through all those pictures, and like I said before, I realized that a number of those buildings were still here, that I thought that a Then and Now book would be interesting.
So did you find photographs in the collection that you maybe made a list of 5 or 10 and then started driving around seeing if you could find what was at those locations?
I did. I found ones that were my favorites, and did look for those, but there were a lot of pictures that I didn't know where the location was, because many of the pictures just have a name, somebody's house, is what a lot of them said. So some of them I recognized from driving around Prescott, and some of them I had to dig down and use census records and do some research to figure out where some of these were. And some of the neat old houses that I really liked, I never did find out where the location was. But one of them, the Amy Dwyer Hill home, which is on Park Avenue, I'd been looking for that home for quite a while because it just intrigued me. And my daughter and son were going to school at Lincoln Elementary School at that time. And when I was picking up my daughter from school one day, I turned around and saw it just across the street. And I just thought, oh, it's been right here in front of me this entire time, and I didn't notice it before.
So it sounds like this is a project, though, that you started in 2019, starting to do the research. We had COVID, so that probably had to interrupt some of your opportunity to come into the museum, obviously. So where in the process did you really start to gain some momentum where you said, okay, I'm going to make this a book. I'm going to make this something I'm going to do regularly, and it's going to be a book?
Not long after I printed out all those pictures and started figuring out where things were. And then I had most of it put together and a lot of the research done and a lot of things written up. And then I got a part-time job for 3 years. So the book just went on a shelf for those entire 3 years.
Sure.
And then after I was done with that part-time job, I dusted it off and got back into it. And
Great. Well, Barbara, we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to come back and talk a little bit about some of your favorite photos in the book. We'll be right back. If you're looking for the store that has everything, Prescott True Value Hardware might be your answer. From having that part to fix that leaky faucet to decorating your garden with charm, they've got it all at Prescott True Value Hardware, and a friendly face to match. For over 30 years, they've proudly served Prescott, supporting neighbors like you and local nonprofits along the way. So take time and visit Prescott True Value Hardware at 846 Miller Valley Road. They're more than just a hardware store. This is Stuart Rosebrook with Arizona Roundup, and my guest today is Barbara Cannon, and we are having a lot of fun today talking about her new book, Prescott Arizona, The Early Years of Then and Now Photo Tour. And we were just looking through the book a little bit during our break, and I turned to page 12 and 13 here, and I've got there's beautiful photos here. The reproduction is wonderful, and you've got the Morris Goldwater and Brothers Dealers in General Merchandise. It's a gorgeous picture of the Goldwater store, and it's dated 1879. And then there's a very busy town photo, which is a parade on Cortez Street with just great signs on all the buildings. Tell me a little bit about these two photos. And I love the not only the fact that you got the Goldwaters building, and but also this parade picture. It's just got so much. You want to stare at this picture for a while. There's so much happening in it. Tell me a little bit about why you chose these two photos.
Well, the Goldwater store I chose because I'm familiar with the Goldwater name, being an Arizona native, and I thought it was just really interesting that they started a store here, and then eventually they started a store in Phoenix. But the person who eventually wound up running it mostly did just so many more good things for Prescott. And he served as mayor and did so much that eventually the Goldwater Lake up the Senator Highway was named after this family. And his nephew was Barry Goldwater, who was a presidential hopeful. That's right. Senator of the state of Arizona and photographer and historian and really remarkable Arizonan for sure. Yeah. I love the photograph where it talks about, not only dealers in general merchandise, but look what they're featuring in there, going way back: toys, furniture, men's furnishings and goods, boys' clothing. So, I mean, and they've got a storefront window for people to peek into for some of the products, and makes you want to go back into time and figure out what they're selling in that beautiful Goldwater store there. Yes, it would be fun to go in and look around.
And then tell me about this next picture. Prescott loves a parade, and this photographer knew what he was doing, and you got the newspaper, the bakery, and then look at all these children and men and women all dressed up to watch the parade. Tell me a little bit more about what made you interested in this photograph.
This one I was especially interested in because it took place in 1917, and just looking at the children on the side, I wondered if maybe my grandmother's family, I don't know if they were there or not, but they could have been there watching the parade. It just kind of put me in the place where my grandparents, my grandmother, it just kind of took me back to time, to what things were like when she was here.
Right, and I love the fact you've got this on Cortez Street. You've got the Arizona Journal-Miner and Goldwater and Brother, and then you have this mixture of the early automobiles and horse-drawn wagons, and it even looks like maybe a child running a small cart with a little tiny pony or miniature horse. Yeah. And then this other car is all decorated. Do you think it's for the holidays?
I don't know. It definitely would have been summer. There are leaves on the trees, and it looks like there may be branches decorating the cars. So I don't know what the parade was for. Possibly 4th of July. Well, if it was 4th of July, there probably would be flags.
Right. So some type of springtime parade. Yeah. I think these are great little nuggets here in your book. And then, of course, you've taken photographs that show what's there today and that we're familiar with. And I guess a few years ago they uncovered the Goldwater sign on the old Goldwater building. So,
really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it had been covered up for many years. So let's take a look. Let's look here through some of your other favorite photographs. What's the next ones we're going to look at, Barbara?
We can jump forward to pages 32 and 33.
All right. What do we see here?
On page 32, the then photo is a little log cabin that doesn't look especially remarkable, but the story behind it is really neat. It was the home of Joseph and Margaret L. It was the first home, well, the largest home in Prescott when they built it in about 1864, and they brought some of the first necessities to Prescott. They brought the first chickens, which produced the first eggs, and they brought honeybees, and they even brought a cat that had kittens, which were very popular because people wanted to control mice, and the kittens were sold for an ounce of gold apiece. Oh,
cats were very valuable in the Old West.
Yep, and then that, I don't know what happened to the cabin. The L's moved somewhere else on Montezuma Street, and then this charming little row of townhouses was built in its stead. I think that's a beautiful little building as well.
Well, I think that's remarkable. I love the fact that it was one of the largest. It was a 5-room cabin, and they had room to expand if their family was going to grow anymore. And then across the street, so they got the traditional log cabin here that they built in 1864, but people started to upgrade their homes pretty quickly. Tell me about the family home across the way from it.
That was the Edward and Nora Shoemate home. They built that around 1900, and this is one of those photos where the family is featured sitting out on the porch. You can see Edward and Nora and their children sitting out there, and he's an interesting person. He started the Granite Dells Summer Resort, which was very popular for many years in Prescott. I know my grandmother and her siblings went there and had fun during the summer, and he later was the owner of the Owl Drug and Candy Company, which was also a popular place in Prescott for a number of years.
Well, I really love these photographs. It takes you back in time. And what is now on that location? It looks like, is it the library?
It's the Prescott Public Library. So the spot where the Shoemate home actually was is now part of the parking lot for the library, but
right.
the area is owned by the library in the city.
What I'm really enjoying about your book, Barbara, is the fact that we can see the heritage and history in the black and white photographs, the historic photos that you picked. And you spent a lot of time looking for those photos to find the right photos that reflected life here in Prescott and the day-to-day life of different generations, and then what is there now. And I think it allows us to kind of take a picture back in time and appreciate our forefathers and the founders of the city and how the city grew, became more sophisticated, but then how things and also how it changes and modernizes. And so I think that's something that people are going to learn. They're going to learn a lot reading your book. We're going to take another quick break and come back and look at some more of your favorite photos and talk a little bit about what is where people can buy the book and what might be on if you're going to do another book here in the future. Hold on, we'll be right back. For over 45 years, Blind Brothers Arizona has been the heart of window style in Prescott. From blinds, shutters, drapes, they custom design and install with expert precision. Tailored to you, whether for your home or office, trust the name locals rely on. Visit blindbrothersaz.com today or call 928-776-1845 for a free consultation. That's blindbrothersaz.com at 928-776-1845. Blind Brothers Arizona, the original since 1979. This is Stuart Rosebrook on Arizona Roundup at Sharlot Hall Museum in Prescott, Arizona. My guest today is Barbara Cannon, and we're talking about Prescott's history, her new book, Prescott Arizona, The Early Years, a Then and Now photo tour. And in the break, we were just talking a little bit about some of the buildings that haven't moved, as well as some that have or been recreated here at Sharlot Hall Museum's campus. And I'm looking on page 26 right now at a beautiful photograph of, looks like a little bit of a mule train or maybe a group of miners that are coming into town. And in the background is the Fremont home. Tell me a little bit about that photograph, because we know that visitors can come to campus and tour the Fremont home, but this is a very interesting photograph.
Yes, this is a very old photograph, actually, that's from the 1870s probably, so Prescott was very young. In fact, the horses are standing on what now would be Gurley Street. And you can see there's the Fremont home and really nothing else beyond it, so that was pretty much the end of town at that time. And that was the corner of Gurley Street and Marina Street, so Prescott was pretty small.
Yeah, and so it looks like the Governor Fremont looked to live in a more modern home for Prescott at the time, and just a little bit of privacy. It was a little bit on the edge of town, but he didn't own it, did he? I think he rented it. It was a house built on speculation, and the gentleman who built it rented it out. And so even in the earliest days of Prescott, you had entrepreneurs in real estate, and we now have that beautiful home here on our campus that you can, when you come, if you're a member or you're a visitor, you can tour the Fremont home. And it's really a remarkable building from the 1870s.
And even though they rented it, they must have had a lot of leeway, because the governor's wife was able to remodel it and add a lot of luxuries to it while they were living in it.
Right. I guess it would be hard to say no to the governor of the territory.
Yeah.
So let's continue through our little tour here of some photographs of buildings that you can still see here in Prescott or here at the Sharlot Hall Museum campus.
So on pages about 34 through 38, most of those feature homes on South Mount Vernon Avenue, which a lot of people are familiar with South Mount Vernon Avenue, especially at Halloween.
Right, that's right.
That, and people can go and trick-or-treat, and the ambiance is really neat. But almost all of these buildings, these homes, are still here and beautifully maintained.
Aren't we fortunate to live in a community where we have so many men and women and families who believe in preservation and maintaining their historic homes, not only for themselves, but for the betterment of our community? There are so many towns that have lost their heritage because they've lost those beautiful homes that were built at the turn of the century or before. And you've done a remarkable job here pairing the then and now photographs of that beautiful historic street.
Thank you. And there were I believe some women, you may know more about this than I do, but there was a group of women in the 1970s who really pushed getting a lot of these buildings and homes put on the National Historic Register. And thank goodness, because I think that's what has preserved Prescott as the charming town that it still is.
Right. I think I'll have to maybe invite one of my friends, Becky Ruffner, to the show. I know her mother, Elizabeth Ruffner, was on the front end of our preservation community, and have a podcast where we discuss the origins of the strong preservation community we have here in Prescott that still is an important part of our history and heritage that works hard not only to teach it but to preserve it. Tell me a little bit more about some of the more interesting photographs in here of some of the buildings we can still see, and even talk a little bit about the Bashford House.
Okay. Well, on page 56, there is an old photograph of a little log cabin that was Prescott's first schoolhouse, and some accounts even say it may have been the first school in all of Arizona. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it was definitely the first schoolhouse in Prescott, and it didn't last very long. The community grew quickly enough that they needed to build another school within about 10 years. But to the left of that little log cabin is a cottonwood tree that still grows on the Mile High School field. And the schoolhouse itself burned in 1948, but there is a replica in the Sharlot Hall Museum.
I know. I always enjoy going over to the replica of that schoolhouse, and you just want to sometimes sit in that schoolhouse and think about what it meant to be either a teacher or a student in that schoolhouse and its humble beginnings of education, but how important it was from the earliest days to establish a school for the children of the community. And of course, education is still such an important component of our community. And that cottonwood tree, I have stopped to admire that tree, and it's well protected over on campus. I can see you have a great photograph of the tree, and I know there's a little bit of a fence around it now to protect it. It is a gorgeous and beautiful cottonwood tree, and it's neat to see the photograph of the schoolhouse next to it.
Yeah.
And I like to invite people to come over to campus and to sit in that schoolhouse. Come to some of our Living History Saturdays, or if you're just walking on campus, sit in that classroom and just imagine what it would have been like to have been a student there. And maybe you were in charge of bringing firewood to warm a winter day in that little schoolhouse.
Such a different experience from school now.
Most definitely. Barbara, take us on a little bit more tour of Prescott in your book here.
Well, one of the favorite places that I took some pictures of and had the then and now, one of my favorite group of old pictures that I found that were just so fun to see, on pages 72 and 73. On page 72, there are two pictures of an old covered bridge that used to span the Granite Creek, and I just thought that was so neat that there was a covered bridge. It's long gone. It wouldn't support traffic nowadays, but I drive on that road regularly, and I just sometimes think how it would have been fun to rumble across the old bridge.
Could have inspired another novel, The Bridges of Yavapai County.
The other picture on page 73 is a picture of an arch that also used to span White Spar Road. I think right in front of the arch is a bridge that replaced, it's just a flat bridge that replaced the covered bridges. But I just thought it was neat that there was an arch at one time. And now in that place, in that area, there's a fire department, and Safeway is near there. Mm-hmm. But that's also the same road I travel, and I thought it would have been fun to drive underneath that arch. Most
definitely. So it must be that the photograph is facing north. So as you were coming, no?
It's facing south.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep. And the road that's going under it is part of Highway 89,
okay,
which used to be ran north to south from Mexico to Montana, and it was known as America's most scenic road trip.
Most definitely. And I will tell anybody who knows driving the White Spar Highway 89 between Congress and Prescott, still it's a scenic highway of grand adventure. You better slow down on those curves coming north or south along that highway. It's always a fun adventure. I bet, and that bridge itself almost looks like it, not sure when it was built, but almost looks like it could have been built by the WPA. There's a lot of those small bridges built around the county but like that improve traffic.
The date of the photograph is the 1930s, so it probably was one of those projects.
Right. I know there's one down on the Bumblebee, I don't know if it's down on Bumblebee Creek or Black Canyon Creek, near the Bumblebee Ranch. And it was a WPA bridge that improved travel north and south. And so the WPA made great improvements across Yavapai County, including the construction of the Sharlot Hall building and Fort Misery. They moved Fort Misery to rebuilt Fort Misery on campus, the schoolhouse, and the ranch house. And so they had a great impact, which is another podcast to talk about the WPA and what they built here in Prescott and still stands remarkably.
In fact, this bridge that's on page 73, I believe that bridge or something like it is actually still there. I've noticed that there are several bridges on White Spar Road, and as I just hiked around, I noticed there are old bridges underneath the modern pavement. So I believe that is probably still this bridge.
Well, Barbara, tell us a little bit about how people can buy this book and where it's available. And I think we're going to plan in the future a book signing, maybe a book talk here on campus in the Bashford House, which is featured in the book, I believe. That people can, if they want to see the original location of the Bashford House, they can find it here in the book. And while you're looking for that, tell us a little bit about where people can buy your book today.
Well, it's for sale at a number of shops downtown around the courthouse. It's also for sale at Sharlot Hall Museum Bookstore and the Western Heritage Center and the Prescott Chamber of Commerce. And it will soon be available at the libraries for checkout. That's in the process. And it's also going to soon be available on Amazon as the paperback and a hardback copy and ebook.
Fantastic. And what is the book retailing for, Barbara?
$25.
$25. I think that's a bargain. This is a must-have book. If you love Prescott, it's a great gift to give family members. I've looked through it now 3 or 4 times, and every time I look through Barbara Cannon's book, Prescott, Arizona, the early years, I'm inspired to get out, walk the streets of Prescott, and go see some of these locations where history happened. And as we like to say here at the Sharlot Hall Museum, inspire people to walk where history happened. Barbara, I hope that we can have you back on the show soon, and that we can schedule a time for you to come to Sharlot Hall Museum's gift shop in the Bashford House and do a talk about your book and a signing as well.
And there will also be a signing at the Peregrine Book Company, who's also selling the book, on February 1st.
Oh, fantastic. And what time will that be?
2 p.m.
2 p.m. All right. And Barbara, do you have any more books planned after this first venture?
I do. I actually gathered enough information for this first book that it could have been a very thick book, so I split it into 2. So I have most of the second book already ready to go.
Volume 2 is waiting out there. That's fantastic. Well, Barbara, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate you coming in to Sharlot Hall Museum to sit down and talk about Prescott, Arizona, the early years, a then and now photo tour, and we look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here.
Great. Happy New Year. And thanks to you all for listening this week on Arizona Roundup with Stuart Rosebrook at Sharlot Hall Museum.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Stuart. And that's a wrap, folks. And we are grateful that you've joined us for Arizona Roundup. And hey, make sure that you check out the Sharlot Hall Museum, charlottehallmuseum.org. Look at the show that's there, and then make a time of saying, maybe when I'm in that area of Prescott, I'll stop in. Will you make sure you do? And thank you to the museum for their sponsorship of this fine program, along with thank you very much to our sponsors. We are grateful for all that you do. And please, friends, make sure that you tell our sponsors how much you appreciate the program. Would you please keep in touch? We would be grateful if you'd let us know how we can be better, how we can do something else that would be helpful to you. Perhaps you have some recommendations to Stuart for the program. And if there's any way you can help us, just please write to me. We'll be glad to do it and pass it on to others. Reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com, and we look forward to hearing from you. All the best and blessings to you, and join us next week. Bob Bosbell. Oh my goodness, can you imagine what a show that will be? Bob Bosbell will be our guest on Arizona Roundup. Till next week, all the best, and bye for now.